So this session is differently organised in that Jacob and I are going to exchange questions with each other. Jacob and his parents have constructed a list of questions that he's going to respond to, and then he's going to ask me some questions about my life in autism too. You have got Jacob's brief biography, but I'll read it out here. He's an NAS young campaigner and a member of the he's a member of the NAS's Young Campaigners group. He's a passionate advocate for children and young people with autism, particularly those that don't have a voice. His recent commitments include speaking at a Lib Dem conference and presenting evidence to the All-Parliamentary Group on Autism, and being part of the NICE Clinical Evidence Focus Group with other young people with autism. At the moment, Jacob's studying for a foundation diploma in art and plans to apply to study fine art at university next year. He enjoys art in all its forms, movies and history. And he loves to laugh and make others laugh, and is happiest when he's at home with family and friends, recounting amusing stories. Jacob has Asperger's syndrome, and he aims to live in a world where his Asperger's is not what defines him to the outside world. So it's a great pleasure I have now to ask Jacob about his life at school, which he left fairly recently. He's just 18 and he's finished in his first term at, where are you at the moment?
I forget the name, Nottingham University.
Nottingham University, doing sort of foundation course before your art degree. Okay, so the first question is, how would you describe autism?
Well, I came up with this very good analogy a while ago, which I've used a lot since. The way I describe a person's mind is like a suitcase. An ordinary person or neurotypical person's mind is a perfectly ordered suitcase. The tooth is with the toothbrush is with the toothpaste, and the socks are with the pants. All in logical order. But an autistic person's brain is very different. The toothpaste is with the socks and the pants are with the toothbrush. And there's an awful lot of one product, like toothpaste. And imagine if you had like 6 or 7 tubes of toothpaste in your suitcase, you'd be an expert on toothpaste, wouldn't you?
I would.
And I think that's an excellent way to describe an autistic person's mind. It's all these different connections made.
And when a person asks you to describe how autism affects you, what do you generally say?
It's very hard for me to say how it affects me because it's such an integral part of what I am. Who I am, it's sure I find issues with dealing with situations, sure, but it's, to me that seems like normal, so it's very hard to separate those things for anyone.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's part of who I am, and I make me better.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about the schools that you attended?
Well, interestingly for me, secondary school was actually a bit easier for me than primary school because by that time I'd had diagnoses and I knew what the problems I was having were and all of that sort of stuff. And it was easy. It was also easier for me because my school had this sort of place called Quest, where all sorts of people, not just with autism, but with other mental issues, varying from all sorts of stuff, would go there and have special lessons there. People who didn't want to go out during break could have lunch there. It was a really nice place. All of the teachers were very nice. And I think if I could point to one thing that gave me help in my entire time at school, I would say it was being able to go there. Personally, I feel every school should have a place like that for people who have not just issues with autism, but issues with everything. And also a very important issue connected to this, like you said earlier, all schools should have that, not just one, because my school did face a bit of an issue. We put all of the work in, made a really, really good department, then all of the other schools just stopped trying, sent all of them here, and in the end, by the time I was leaving, I can just say, with the greatest respect, we are quite challenging people had been coming. And it was like, one boy, bless him, had had a bit of an obsession with guns. And he just didn't understand, and he thought it would be entirely fine if he brought his air rifle into school to show his friends. It's just, bless him, he didn't understand that, and that's, someone just had to sit down with him and explain. But it's really a testament to how good the department was. It was able to explain that, and he wasn't expelled or anything.
And that was your secondary school?
Yeah.
Yeah. And can you think back to primary school and how that was for you?
Primary school was very different because I didn't have the diagnoses back then. It took me quite a while to get diagnoses. And generally there just wasn't the same sort of help. I think in the entire school there was only one TA, and I barely had any time with that person. And there were even the other kids that were in, I can say, the special needs group weren't getting that much help either. Is a lot of thing. It's a very important thing people need to remember. Yes, we do need to put the work in with secondary schools, but primary schools are just as important, because if we can handle these issues earlier, it will stop a lot of these issues. Because, like I said, those challenging people wouldn't have been so challenging if people had been there for them and started the process in primary school. The process needs to start in primary school and continue in secondary school.
And how old were you when you were diagnosed?
With autism? Sorry, I don't remember ages.
No, you told me you weren't very good with dates, but I think you said it was probably sometime when you were at primary school.
It was actually a bit later. It was sort of an and an ahhing thing. People in school had thought I was autistic, but it never really was needed to get a diagnosis. It was only when we needed it for a piece of paper to sign that we actually went and got diagnosed. But something I would point out there is it wasn't school that got me diagnosed, it was me and my mother going out to a clinic, and really we can all agree on this. When it comes down to diagnosis, it would help so many people if it was schools spotting them and sending them to be diagnosed, not a parent spotting something. Using information, for all we know, could have just got off the internet to go take their child. It should be school spotting that, shouldn't it, really?
And what difference did getting a diagnosis make to you or to your mother?
Two things I would say it helped is you really would be surprised how easier it is to get certain things if you've actually got a diagnosis. And two, it helped me personally a lot, because a lot of things that were quirks and things I had trouble understanding, I had a reason for now. And strangely sound, just having that reason helped quite a lot for me.
Yeah, okay. And I know as part of your work for the Young Campaigners, you're often asked about what makes a good teacher or a teaching assistant. So in your view, what sort of a teacher or teaching assistant helped you when you were at school? What sort of qualities? And
Patient is a big one. You always need to be patient, even when it might be hard. Caring. Quiet, don't be too loud. Accepting as well, accept these person's quirks. And also, a very good technique I saw is don't try to get them to stop something outright, even if it's something you need to do. Get them to stop it. It's do it calmly. Like, I used to have a lot of trouble concentrating on work, and my mind would just go all directions, and you should see some of the doodles I had on math sheets. So it's like a sheet of maths work I once spent most of the lesson drawing a dragon. And it's the teachers for me didn't say stop that, don't do that, don't do that. They gradually helped me and encouraged me to concentrate more. And I still have trouble with a wandering mind, but there's no massive dragons on the side of my work anymore.
But you were given permission to do that. And we've talked a lot over these 2 days about adjustments that schools can make so that school is an easier place to be. You mentioned the lunchtime club and the Quest club. I wondered if you can think of, and also being allowed to draw dragons in the maths lesson. I mean, what other adjustments were important to you?
The lunch club was a very important adjustment for me personally because I wasn't at that point ready to go out at lunchtime. I needed somewhere to be quiet and just to do my own thing at lunchtime, which was very good. Being able to have being able to just have lessons up at Quest was very good for me at first. But it was also the fact that I slowly moved down into mainstream school. They didn't do it cold turkey. I gradually took lessons down in mainstream school, and by the time I was leaving school, I spent my entire school day in mainstream school, all of my lessons. But the most important thing was I was still allowed to come up for Quest at lunchtime. So is working on someone else's time schedule was very good.
And were you ever bullied at school?
Oh yes, definitely.
And can you say what helped you to manage that, whether you felt staff were sufficiently supportive and tried to prevent it from happening, or whether you developed strategies that were successful? Or
all due respect, I would say in this, my staff were very good. My teachers really did help me, but when it came down to the issue of bullying, it was something I had to handle myself, and it's, well, with the greatest respect, I just needed to prove to them I wasn't going to take it.
Yeah, and Gareth today mentioned peer education 10 times, or 8.5, I think it was.
Yeah.
To what extent were your peers or your classmates told about the nature of your difficulties, or why you responded in certain ways, or why you needed support?
Now that's something you need to be careful of, because there are schools that can take that in a very bad way. I know someone who the school did the mistake of telling the entire class every detail about autism and the fact that he was autistic, and that was mortifying for him. Something I've found is that you really would be surprised how accepting kids can get if they are just alongside these people through their careers. Because that's a benefit Quest had on the flip side of it. You had this Quest group that was also part of mainstream school, because we did have lessons in Quest, but we also had lessons down in mainstream school. And you see, that gave us life experience working with the other kids as well. But it also gave the other kids a chance to learn the ins and outs of these people. Not like saying they're wackos. They understood that we're just friendly people, and they got to like us for that strength. It was something that I think was very good, because back when, not too long ago, any people like us, any people with autism even, would just get sent off to some special school, we'll say, in loose terms. And that would mean that all of this stigma that exists now is because when those people were young, they never saw these people. They were just taught to think of these people as crazy. And by being alongside kids like me, the neurotypical kids have learned that we're not crazy people inherently.
So would you say you developed some friends when you were at school, at secondary school?
Oh yeah, I did develop friends, acquaintances.
Yeah. Good. So I think it's now your turn to ask me some questions, if you've got your...
Yes. Why did you come to decide to become an expert in autism?
Did you all hear that? Why did I decide to become an expert in autism? And the first thing is that I'm not particularly keen on the word expert. I think we've all got an interest in autism, and that's dependent on the experiences we've had in autism. And my first experience was meeting a wonderful professional psychologist called Elizabeth Newson, who was also a parent of a young man with Asperger's syndrome. And she was my main lecturer when I studied psychology, and so most of the lectures were on autism and not on any other area of psychology. And she was passionate about involving parents and asking them questions that enabled her to write reports that really reflected the child in front of her, as opposed to reading a book about autism. And she would say, do you think what we've seen today is typical of your child? What could we ask him to do where he could show us what he's most capable of doing, or where you could show us what you're most concerned about? So she was very respectful, she was a very good listener, and she taught all the psychologists who went through her course how to engage parents in a positive way and always to listen to the parents. And so I then went on to work with her on a large project in autism, looking at provision for children with autism in different schools, because this was in late 1980s when we didn't have the internet, and so there was very few ideas on what people were doing with children with autism. So we've come a long way since then. That was the starting point.
What's the most important thing you've learned about autism?
I think over the years you keep changing your perspective on what you prioritise and what you should put over when you are talking about autism, and particularly interventions in autism. And more now I'm talking about our own personal style, so how people without autism interact and approach children and adults with autism in a way that they can feel relaxed and they can communicate and they enjoy the experience. So, and so those of you who went to Phoebe Caldwell's workshops today will know exactly what I mean, that it's not about which toolkit you have, it's about knowing the person in front of you. And I don't remember her exact words, but she says, I am new to the situation every time I meet a new person with autism. I have to learn their language, and I have to be a very good observer and communicate with them in the way in which they are communicating with me. So I think that's incredibly important.
If you could change one thing in education for autistic children, what would it be?
I think I still have to say that we need to involve parents and carers far more than we do. Way back in '78, there was the Warnock Report that had a chapter called Parents as Partners, but we've come a long way in that we involve them very much more than we did, but I still meet parents who feel very excluded from their child's education when they'd like to be included. And if I can have two things, the second one is and that we're doing great work on now, is involving autistic children and autistic adults in the work we do, not just asking their opinion after we've designed something or provided the new build or whatever, but having them there at the start.
Yeah, something I could just connect to that is governments have sometimes said when I'm interviewing people, we don't know what to ask on a research. It's Autistic Society, any number of these people would be fine to do the research for you. I personally could tell you all the things you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And why have we been so blind to that for so long? Proofreading is absolutely fantastic. So whenever now we design a questionnaire or survey form, we give it to a group of autistic adults who will tell us which words are offensive or phrases or the questions, the key questions we've missed out that they think are priorities but we haven't prioritised. So absolutely right.
Yes.
Absolutely
more
right.
questions you wanted to ask me?
More questions for you, yes. So, yeah, what would you like to do when you, well, perhaps I think you said something about how can teachers support pupils with autism better. Is there anything else you wanted to say on that?
There's one thing I didn't quite touch on. Planning changes is also a really good thing because my personal department was brilliant, but there were a few flaws. There's like one incident I really remember. It's like, my mum reminded me of this story. It's one day I remembered it after she told me. It's one day we'd been sent down to mainstream school at a time we normally wouldn't be. This time we would normally be up in Quest, so I was obviously very upset, and it was a sex education lesson. And when I'd got home, I'd said, it's really upset. I learned all of this stuff about in year 6. My mum rather diplomatically said, well, maybe the Quest teachers didn't want to, were a bit embarrassed, didn't want to explain it to you. My words were, what's so complicated? I learned all about it in year 6. If you don't, it only has sex when you really want to, and if you when you do, use a condom.
Right.
I understand why they did it now, but I can assure you back then I didn't. So if there is going to be a change to the lesson, do tell them ahead of schedule and try as much as you can to explain it.
Okay. And moving to parents, do parents make a difference to the sort of education that their children receive?
Without a doubt. As I've said before, me getting the help I needed was down, and becoming what I am today, was down to my pushy mother. Give us a wave. She didn't take no for an answer, and she pushed until I got the help I needed. And you see, the problem is many people with autism don't have pushy mothers. Any parent needs to be pushy.
And does she push you too?
Oh, of course she does.
Yeah.
Definitely. And a technique I thought that was personally quite good is just explaining why to do work is, you see, I really don't like maths, hate maths, but they explained it to me in a very nice way. Look, we won't love you any less if you don't do well in your maths, but I'm sad to tell you this, but the world needs you to learn maths. So begrudgingly, I did it, and once I got my C, I burned all of my maths books in the barbecue with a garden flamethrower. And I can tell you it was one of the most satisfying things ever. I knew that I would never, ever have to do maths again.
Right. And turning now to the decision makers, you have been involved in giving advice to national bodies. What messages have you been given to them about how they could improve education for children with autism?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. The question I have down here is, what can decision makers do to improve education for children and young people?
Well, the multiple things that decision makers should do is, very important thing, I've said this before, is make all schools stay to the same standards. It just would make it so easy if every school had to do the same amount of things. And training is the biggest one for me personally, is training for all of you lovely people here is, you need to be trained how to handle people with autism. It's just a basic, should be a basic sort of teacher training thing. When you're becoming a teacher, you're trained how to deal with this stuff.
And what's the most important thing you'd like to tell people in this room today, the teachers particularly in this room today?
All of you have come to this meeting today because you want to change things. You know there's a problem and you're trying to fix it. But there are an awful lot of teachers out there that don't know and don't understand, and a few of them don't even care. You all need to go out there and make them care. You need to go out there and make them listen.
And just the final question to you, how do you see your career developing? Planning to go to university? Could you tell us a little bit about which university and the course, and then maybe what you see yourselves doing after that?
I plan to go to Lincoln University, do fine art there. They've got very good sort of special needs. After that, I'm a little unsure what I'm doing at the moment. There's a couple of things I'm looking at doing, perhaps doing a job in art. I like telling stories, writing books. I'm even considering doing this professionally, but I don't know what I'm doing at the minute.
And you mentioned drawing dragons. Have you got other things, other art forms that you enjoy?
I've got loads of art forms. I particularly like inks. You should see some of the stuff I've got at home. At home I've made a spell book of all sorts of things, not just dragons, demons, vampires, werewolves, all sorts of stuff in my spell book.
Yeah. And is it drawing and painting or using pens, or do you...
I use all of it.
Yeah. Sculpting?
Not as much, but some of the clay things I've done, people say are very good.
Yeah, good, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Jacob, for sharing with us your thoughts about school and how they might enhance their practice. Thank you very much indeed.